Who was James Cone? James Cone is the father of, as we mostly call him, the father of Black theology. The father of Black theology. Cone was actually born in 1938, like I said. He's a contemporary of Desmond Tutu, just some 7 years difference. And he was a prominent African American theologian and scholar. He earned his doctorate in systematic theology from Northwestern University. And Cole's life experience growing up in the racially segregated South deeply influenced his theological perspective and activism. He's said to have actually grown up born in Ancaster, for this. So that's where he grew up, and that really shaped him, in terms of his activism, and also influenced his life in diverse ways. Before we go into his historical context, let me just provide some idea of his theological contribution and background as well. Cone's seminal work included Black Theology and Black Power, a book that he wrote in 1969. And today, as I'm presenting on him, I will also want to do a little bit reflection of that book, a little summary or overview. We can call it a little review of that book. I don't go so much deep into it because of our time. But the reason why I want to do that is the book Black Theology and Black Power is one of the famous books that Cone is and will forever be remembered for. In that book, he argued that God's side were the oppressed and that Christianity demands liberation for the marginalized. So we'll go into that book a little, very soon. He emphasized that theology must be contextual, reflecting the struggle of the people serves. His later book also included a Black Theology of Liberation, which he produced in 1970. That is also a powerful book if you've gotten a chance to read that book. And that solidifies his position as a leading voice in liberation theology. Cone was heavily influenced by Dr. Martin Luther King, a nonviolent activist, and also, Malcolm X, his emphasis on Black self-determination. So Cone is a theologian, an activist, like I've said, and he has made a lot of contribution to liberation theology, particularly in the context of Black theology, or what liberation is supposed to mean for Black people and African people at large. Now, knowing a little bit about Cone's context will provide us the insight as to why he focused his life and attention, career, and dedication and everything on Black theology. Historically, the civil rights movement, was at its peak around the 1950s and 1960s. And that was also within the period of Cone. Cone was actually born about 73 years down the road from America's Civil War. The Civil War in America was predominantly about the southern states, that is Texas, Florida, and those states down there, fighting the northern states. The northern states are like where I am, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, So these two states, the southern and the northern states, had a war over the idea of slavery. The southern states were thinking that slavery was not supposed to be abolished. They were supposed to continue. And the northern states were like, no, we cannot do that. So for so many years, even up to now, when an American tells you that things are going south, they simply mean that things are going, the horrible way, not the nice way, right? The way that we don't like it, we don't want it, the oppressive way, you can call it that way. Because the South was noted for, or known for, the numerous plantations they had and how they abused the life of so many people. Even when slavery was abolished, a lot of the Blacks would still have to run away from the South to the North. The white people were mostly living and building their lives here in the North, building industries and all of that. And for the South, that is where they built their plantations and all of that, keeping the Black people there, a lot of them for their dirty jobs and treating them in very callous and inhuman ways. So if you've heard, for instance, a word like the railway, the underground railway, the underground railway wasn't any particular road anywhere, but it was a language or a term that the Black people were using to communicate, to show that this is how you can escape your slave master from the south and you run away. So the railway will take you to the destination in the northern part of America, which is, like I said, Minnesota and a couple of places here. So don't be surprised that most of the states here in the north are noted for their passion for activism, human rights, and all of that. They've always tried to prioritize people's rights and safety and all of that against anything that looks like oppression or inhuman treatment of people. So that was the period, the civil rights movement period, 1960. It was a time that here I am, where are you? Go to mommy. So that was the period where Cone did his work. The civil rights movement was actually led by Dr. Martin Luther King, together with a lot of other generals. I call them generals because these are folks who are very well educated, and they did not try to use their education just to benefit themselves, but to see how best they could advocate for the safety, the liberation, the freedom of all persons, particularly Black people. Again, also note that during the time of Cone, Black people in this country, America, could not even vote. They were disenfranchised, from voting. Even up to now, I think there is a portion, I could be wrong, and I can't be corrected, but I think there is a portion in the American Constitution that asserts that Black people's votes are supposed to be counted and valued in a certain way, which is different from white people. In fact, Cone lived in the period of the Jim Crow era. The Jim Crow era was when Black people were not allowed to, for instance, use or visit washrooms that white people were also using. If you go to a train station, you're not supposed to stand at the place where white people are supposed to stand and all of that. You cannot go to a restaurant and sit at the place where white people are supposed to sit. If you want to put your child in a school, you don't put your child in a school where white people put their children, and all of those things. There were technically a huge division between white people and Black people, and Black people were treated like second-class people in this country. So I'm not surprised when Dr. Martin Luther King visited Ghana during our independence celebration in 1957, SIP March. Sergeant for Dr. Kwame Nkrumah told him that Ghana was going to do all that it can to make sure that we help amplify the struggle of our fellow brothers and sisters who are in America, and let America know that a country that is supposed to be a country of liberation for all people cannot treat other humans here as if they are second-class citizens. That was how Black people were treated. So that's to give you some idea of the context in which James Cone lived in, which is not so different from our context today. Is that understood? Because we have so many problems in our society today as well. And unfortunately, maybe we are not doing some of the work that Cone did, particularly in the lines of liberation. Today, come to Africa, and regardless of all the struggles we are going through, all that our people have resorted to do is to pray more. I'm not saying prayer is not good. Continue to, build and establish more churches and give people a little more spiritual directions and take their monies. Exploitation or an all manner of, sorry to use the word shit, and they are not yielding any fruit. And we are okay because we are looking for a deliverer who will come from heaven to deliver us. But I remember the last time Israel waited on God that way, I think that somehow disappointed them. Because when they were thinking that they were going to get an emperor or somebody who was going to be maybe a president or a king to deliver them, the Lord rather decided to send them a Messiah who was to come to teach them what it means to love. Yeah. Because there are certain things the Lord has asked us to fix ourselves, and that is by picking up the sword of the scriptures to fight all manner of hatred, animosity, and injustice in our societies. And this is exactly what Kun did when he was born in this context. Now, like I said, I'd like to pick a little bit and pieces of Kun's work on Black theology, Black power, to explain a few things. First of all, let me also state that the language or the term Black power did not begin with James Cone. He did not coin that term. That term already existed, Black power. But Cone gave it a different understanding and ideology. That was so beautiful. Black Theology and Black Power, the book he wrote in 1969, was a pivotal work in the development of Black liberation theology. Cone's book emerged as a powerful response to systematic racism and oppression faced by African Americans. So this was the emergence of the Black theology. This is where he started from. Now, the insight or the meaning of Black power that Cone gave to the world was for Black people to embrace their Blackness and see the beauty in it, and be proud of who we are as Black people, and rather not see Blackness as inferiority or see Blackness as weakness or Blackness as anything horrible, bad, negative, and all that Black has been referred and known by so many people, and even by our dictionaries, which originally wasn't the meaning of the word Black. So Cone argued a lot in that book and inspired Black people to embrace their Blackness, and that is what Black power is about. Black theology, on the other hand, is about how we talk about God in the context of Blackness and Black people. Now, Black power in the church. Let's look at what Cone will think about that. Cone argues in this same book that the church should be a platform for Black empowerment. It should not only provide spiritual solace, but also promote social and political empowerment. And I think this is what our conversation has always been, because it's like our churches have become places of comfort, spiritual solace. We come, we dance, pastor come to preach, and the preaching most of the time is more or less like motivational speak, or people who tend to be very fundamentalist and conservative will spend all their time talking about, hey, do not gossip against a brother, do not take somebody's money, do not be jealous, do not, they are good stuff, right? I'm not saying they're bad. Virtues are good. Teaching people about moral stuff are good. But for Cone, a church is supposed to go beyond that. A church is supposed to promote social and political empowerment, because that is the task. That is the mandate of the gospel. So the book calls for Black people to take control of their own destiny and not rely solely on white institutions for validation and support. Some of you might have seen the way I came against the so-called Trump post that our brother Enoch shared on the platform recently. And I made a statement like, we are tired as Black people, as African people, to continually trying to prove ourselves to, the white man. We don't have to get that shit anymore going, right? It's about time that we need to see how best we can embrace ourselves and see how best we can build up ourselves, improve ourselves, and become better for ourselves and for our nations, for our generations, for our children, for our society, and not trying to get a white man to validate us, because a white man will not. And they are never ready to even understand our struggles, And I said this not in terms of generalizing every white man for this, or kind of trying to incriminate every white man for this. No, that's not the point. But yeah, we all know what we talked about here. When we talk about white supremacists, this is what I'm referring to. Now, core ideas of Cone's book, and yes, these ideas also continue to reflect in the other theological works Cone did. There are three major ideas that Cone tried to promote or speak to. The first one is Black liberation theology. Cone's book argues that God is on the side of the oppressed, and that faith should not empower marginalized, faith should empower marginalized communities to fight for justice. So for Kuhn, again, I know some of you might have seen the motto we've been using, God is black, God is black. And maybe you might not really understand why we came or we arrived at that. And I'm not surprised in case maybe you somehow don't even feel comfortable about that ideology that God is black. I'm sorry. This is the man who inspired our, spirit behind IAB and Black Ministry. In the next 1,000 years to come, if IAB, by the grace of God, continue to grow and expand, we cannot talk about IAB and will not refer back to this man, James Cone, because his ideologies, his philosophy, his theology is what has inspired, particularly me, to want to take this bold decision. And thanks be to God for sending great people and amazing people like yourselves also my way, that we can collectively do this and make this work. Make this a voice for the voiceless and speak up, defend, and protect the vulnerable. For Cone, God is black. God is black simply means that, according to him, any person who is being oppressed is actually a person considered as a black person. Hear me. His black ideologies starts or begins from the context of skin color. And then as he continues to argue in this book, he comes to that place where he does no longer refer blackness to only skin color, but blackness to mentality. Okay? So for him, any person who is going through oppression, any person who has been oppressed, any person who is struggling, who is struggling or who is suffering, is a black person. And that person is the person that the Lord stands with. God, for him, stands with the oppressed, not the oppressor. So if a white man oppress a black person, that white man should know that God is black and God is the one he's oppressing, because God is with the person who is being oppressed. If you're a white man, according to Cone, and you find it hard to see your fellow white man oppressing a black person, and therefore you decide to feed that black person, you decide to speak up for that black person, you decide to stand up for that black person, you, that white man, for Cone, you are no longer white, you are black yourself, because you are thinking just like the way Jesus would have taught. That is beautiful, and for me it's powerful. So for him, God is black, God is not white, because since time immemorial, the people who have really suffered, people who have been treated, in fact, what happened here in America during the transatlantic slave trade period is something that the world has never known. It was a kind of slavery that the world has ever existed in human history in this life. It was so horrible, very cruel. People were treated less than animals in this place, in this world. So black people, since time immemorial, have been known for all the struggles and suffering of humanity. And for him, we are the people that the Lord stands with. We are the people that God embraces and continually try to give us hope, love, and show us the way. So any white man, any oppressor, somebody who comes from a generation of the oppressors, who think, who cries, who weeps, who stands with black people, is himself or herself a black person, and not just a skin color. So I wouldn't be surprised in the future years if we truly get white people who truly mean well for us and care for the welfare and the empowerment of black people. We will surely welcome them because they are our brothers, and that is what Imago Dei is about: the image of God for all persons. So in fact, I'm sorry when I get in conversation like this, I become so passionate, emotional. I think, hey, sometimes take the hours away. I'm going to try my best to make sure I stick to the time. So it blends theology with social activism. Now, the second idea that Cone tries to, put out here again in this book is the book encourages African Americans to embrace their blackness as a source of strength, dignity, and identity. It challenges the negative perception of blackness. I think I already talked about that, so I'm not going to go too much deeper into that for our time's sake. The third thing we should talk about is the quest for liberation. Cohen emphasized that the church should actively engage in the struggle for social and political justice, advocating for Black self-determination and equality. So again, I've also already talked about that. The church is supposed to be a place for activism, for liberation, advocacy, and all of that, and not just singing songs and praising God and thinking God is the sky somewhere and we need to do something for that God to be happy. God lives in us, and the kingdom of God is among us, and that is your fellow brother and sister who is suffering, and how deeply we try to go down for those people to support them. That is according to Cohen. Now, controversies and critiques of Cohen's work, what some people have thought about Cohen and the way they see him, let's look at that as well. Black theology and Black power received strong support from those advocating for civil rights and seeking theological justification for the activism. So many people have used the Bible to promote ideologies, for instance, of slavery. In fact, I think I've said it before and I'm saying it again. One of my mentors, Professor Emeritus Zalanga, once said something that during the time of the civil rights movement, and even the time that the time of the abolitionists, rather, when slavery was supposed to come to an end, it is said that people who used the Bible to defend slavery had it very easy. They take the Bible and they got 1,001,000,000 quotations to quote 100 plus 1 to show that slavery is good and slavery have to carry on. But those who wanted to use the Bible to stop slavery have to do a sophisticated exegesis to quote this quotation and try to explain it this way, that way, so people could understand that the Bible have some slavery stories in it, but it does not mean that God supports slavery. So I want to say this. It is not enough to read the Bible all the time and say that, oh, this is written in the Bible, that is written in the Bible. It might be written in the Bible, but what does it mean? Does that mean that God supported? Does that mean that what happened those years should still happen today? And what does God think about it? How does it affect our fellow brothers and sisters? And if it was me or you, will you be happy? Be in that shit. How we critique and question and calls out the Bible and its characters and even ask who wrote this and where is it coming from is what theology is about. And that is what some of us are doing here. So Cohen and his work was fully accepted and embraced by people who believe in activism and who believe in liberation. Now, critics found Cohen's idea radical. Unfortunately, and it's always looked like that, right? Do not be surprised that very soon there'll be some people in our world who'll be like, oh, what are these IB people doing? They are so radical, and you don't understand them, and things like that. Yeah, it happened to Cohen. People found his ideas very radical and controversial, especially in his reevaluation of traditional theological concepts in the context of the Black experiences. So, yeah, since he was challenging status quo, since he was challenging systems and structures that has been set up in this place to oppress people, people found him so radical. Some thought that, Cohen is this, Cohen is that. And of course, it was the same with Dr. Martin Luther King. People called him the Antichrist and things like that in this country. But after he was shot and killed, people have come to realize that indeed, King was an angel sent by God to save humanity. It was the same with Cohen. Don't be surprised. Now, other people who wanted to wallow in the midway, in the mushy way, came up with questions like, oh, Cohen, you're doing well, but what about reconciliation? What if you rather keep the conversation around reconciliation, like how Black people and white people can come together and, be one people and all of that? And Cohen was like, no. Reconciliation cannot take place when there are systems and structures still oppressing people. The oppression must stop before we talk about reconciliation. And he has a famous quote. I'll come back to it. I think I have it in one of my slides. I don't know if I'm going to quote it right, but that's what it says. It says that a word of reconciliation too soon to the oppressor will only continue to strengthen him to oppress the more. So for him, no, we can talk about reconciliation, but it is only after the oppressor have stopped oppressing people. Some people are like, okay, what about inclusiveness? Inclusiveness is like, okay, Kun, you're talking about Black people. What about Asian people? What about women? What about and all of that? I think Kun did a great work by not only limiting himself to the experiences of Black people in America, but also trying to echo the problems and the struggles that African people are also facing in Africa and likewise the entire global South. He might not have done enough work in terms of inclusivity, but he did at least speak to our situation in Africa and also particularly the global South. What about white Christianity? Oh, for Kuhn, white Christianity was just, a kind of a system of oppression. That is how he sees it. White Christianity was just a system of oppression that was continually, that has, and is still and will, if God has not intervened, continue to oppress people. So yeah, if you see a white church, think if Kuhn should be alive, he'll tell you, be careful. Yeah. That doesn't mean that all white, Christian churches have continued to be that way though. Because for instance, I'm in the ELCA and the ELCA, is doing marvelous work in terms of liberation. But of course, to an extent, I think I will agree with Kuhn because America is, for instance, tending to what we call Christian nationalism. And that is what somebody like Trump stands for, right? A lot of Republicans are Christian nationalists. And that is where most of the time, a lot of, racism and white supremacy ideologies and things comes from. They do less about liberation and all of that. So I think to an extent, there's a lot of wisdom in what Kuhn meant or what Kuhn said about white Christianity. All right, let's come to legacy. Kuhn's work, the book, Black Theology and Black Power, has left a lot of impact on so many people, including myself. It played a pivotal role in shaping Black liberation theology and influenced theologians and activists alike. Kuhn's ideas continue to inspire discussion of race, theology, and social justice. Intersectionality, yes, I think I've already said a little bit about that. He did talk about women and then also promoted inclusive theology in a certain way, particularly those that address, the full spectrum of Black experiences. And today, groups like the Black Lives Matter and all of that have picked up his work in diverse ways. So yeah, contemporary, his work remained very relevant for Black Lives Matters, for IAB ministries and all the organizations, Black Restorative Justice Organization and all the other ones that are doing a lot of work about Black liberation, Black healing, African sovereignty, freedom, the likes. Now, this is where I'm going to end my presentation. And two things that I want to pick out here, is, like Kuhn said, a word about reconciliation too soon or at the wrong time to the oppressors only grant them more power to oppress Black people. We cannot do theology, again, according to Kuhn, we cannot do theology and not talk about the oppressed. And for him, and according to him, God is Black. Thank you so much.